So it turns out it's no longer a matter of speculation. The US government has been conspiring with the heads of Silicon Valley social media platforms to manufacture consent electorally, censor what they deem misinformation, and ban dissident voices from the town square. Now, this shouldn't be surprising to us, but it is surprising to plenty of people who are outside of political narratives, who don't question things as much. And we've got disparate bits of information, which I'll be referencing as we go through this major internet expose.
Recent appearance on Joe Rogan, where he just explicitly said it, for instance.
Oh, no. He soft-sold it.
Oh, really?
It's even worse. Yeah. But the Intercept story actually exposes literal federal surveillance on an unprecedented scale, and it is to the point where this will have electoral consequences as of next week with the midterms, and I wouldn't be shocked if it has legal consequences and political consequences in the form of impeachment hearings. And I'm not stoking this up. I'm not just being wishful thinking here. This is colossal. The Intercept article actually compares it to Watergate. The scope of this is far, far bigger. It's far more egregious. So we're going to explore the Intercept exclusive and all the ancillary articles that led up to it. Just before we start, I've been forced to plug this. It's the free premium podcast because it's our anniversary event, and this is my good friend John Wheatley and Bo's podcast on British aesthetics. So go enjoy that on the website. Anyway, onto the more important and relevant stuff. The Intercept article here we have, it's titled Truth Cops. The leaked documents outline DHS's plans to police disinformation. And I'm going to read at length from this. It's going to be a very long segment, but it really is worth it. So, the Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous, an investigation by The Intercept has found. Years of internal DHS memos, emails and documents, obtained via leaks in an ongoing lawsuit, as well as public documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. The work, much of which remains unknown to the American public, came into clear review earlier this year when the DHS announced a new Disinformation Governance Board. We all remember Nina Jankowicz, for example. We'll talk about her later. A panel designed to police misinformation, false information spread unintentionally, disinformation, false information spread intentionally, and that's usually a term used in times of war by enemy states, so it's literally calling Americans that spread, quote, disinformation agents of foreign powers working to undermine. Exactly. Whereas what the Biden administration doing would fall under the definition of sedition and treason, and I hope trials follow as a result. And malinformation, factual information shared, typically out of context with harmful intent. So you can be punished if you're sharing factual information, but the fact checkers deem it without context. Yeah. All of that apparently allegedly threatens US interests. While the board was widely ridiculed, immediately scaled back and then shut down within a few months, other initiatives are underway as DHS pivots to monitoring social media now that its original mandate, the war on terror, has been wound down. So this is just a retranslation of the Patriot Act.
The fun thing is that we managed to get the DHS, the Disinformation Governance Board, shut down, yes, but it still lives on in spirit in what we're going to be discussing.
Well, it predates it. If anything, the Disinformation Governance Board would have at least been more outward-facing and transparent.
It was more a formalisation of policies the government has already been undertaking.
Yes, it was, we're not doing this. The Disinformation Governance Board was the, and now it's a good thing stage. They didn't even make it to that, but they were already doing it in various forms, and The Intercept has done some fantastic reporting here. And reminder, The Intercept is a very left-leaning outlet, with it, to the point of where its Trump derangement syndrome actually drove Glenn Greenwald to quit and start his own Substack. So this is not on the side of the Trumpers, the MAGA Republicans. This is just saying, dear God, our guy, in many respects, Joe Biden, is an authoritarian dictocrat.
I mean, I respect their ability to come out and just be like, yeah, guys, I mean, I know we're not on your side, but Christ.
Yeah, it's not the Sam Harris position. Behind closed doors and through pressure on private platforms, the US government has urged its power to try to shape online discourse. According to meeting minutes and other records appended to a lawsuit filed by Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, a Republican who is running for the Senate, discussions have ranged from the scale and scope of government intervention in online discourse to the mechanics of streamlining takedown requests for false or intentionally misleading information. According to a draft copy of DHS's Quadrennial Homeland Security Review, DHS's capstone report outlining the department's strategy and priorities in the coming years, the department plans to target, quote, inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including, quote, the origins of COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. Racial justice, the US's withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of the US's support to Ukraine. So this is just a comprehensive overview of all the current things. It's the lockdown was good, mandates were good, BLM was peaceful, Afghanistan wasn't botched, and Ukraine is a bastion of democracy. And if you say anything else other than that, the entire federal government will crash down on you.
Well, that's the thing. This is only one step removed from making this stuff illegal, just outright.
Yes, and we will see how the infrastructure has already been laid out to do that as we go on when we look at the exact kind of groups involved in corresponding with the White
You may
House.
not
on
get
this.
put in real prison for this stuff right now, under certain circumstances, but you will be getting get taken off of all major social media platforms.
Well, they already have attempted to do it with some of Trump's allies in saying, oh, you supported January 6th, etc., you incited violence. So they are looking to lock them up. They just haven't come for the American people directly yet. They're only cancelling your social media accounts, eventually all of your banking abilities, and unpersoning you entirely. And the groups involved in this are intent on doing that, and the White House is trying to let them. The challenge is particularly acute in marginalised communities, the report states, which are often the targets of false or misleading information, such as false information on voting procedures targeting people of colour. Do you remember when Joe Biden said that black people can't use the internet, so they can't get voter IDs? Yeah, I think Joe Biden's more of a threat to black people voting than anything, but there you go. The inclusion of the 2021 US withdrawal from Afghanistan is particularly noteworthy, given that House Republicans, should they take the majority in the midterms next week, have vowed to investigate it. This makes Benghazi look like a much smaller issue, said Rep. Mike Johnson, RLA, a member of the Armed Services Committee, adding that finding answers will be a top priority. So the DHS justifies all these goals, which have expanded far beyond its original purview on foreign threats to encompass disinformation originating domestically, by claiming that terrorist threats can, quote, be exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online. The CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, another alphabet agency which is coordinated on this, has defended its burgeoning social media monitoring authorities, stating that, quote, once CISA notified a social media platform of the disinformation, the social media platform could independently decide whether or not to remove the post or modify it. So that means that the government are saying, oh, it's not our fault, it's a private company, they can do what they want. But they're obviously leveraging state power, and they're holding the idea of social media platform restrictions through Congress over their head to say you should comply with us so you can enjoy all protections.
Well, this has been the excuse that leftists have used for a long time. They're a private company, they can do what they want. The problem is now that now that all of this information has come out, they won't actually go back and try and reformulate new principles. They will simply go, oh, well, the government is just trying to protect people from bad information.
Yeah.
That's what they'll do.
And the government itself, immediately contradicting this, says, as documents revealed by the Missouri lawsuit show, the CISA's goal has been to make platforms more responsive to their suggestions. So they're engaging a behavioural nudge, much like Sage did during the pandemic in the UK. There's a history of this. Sorry. They stepped up counter-disinformation efforts began in 2018, following a high-profile hacking incident of US firms. When Congress passed and President Donald Trump, unfortunately, signed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act, forming a new wing of DHS devoted to protecting critical national infrastructure. So
Jesus
unfortunately,
Christ, you're right there, Connor.
yeah, sorry,
You seem like you're struggling.
Cough. Yeah,
Let's just say that this is making you feel so sick.
unfortunately so. Yeah, so unfortunately, Trump basically wove the noose for his own neck here. And he's created the infrastructure, probably unknowingly, that's allowed them to target their political opposition and
Sadly,
hamper his electoral viability.
Trump had a lack of political savvy in a lot of areas, which meant it was very easy for some of his enemies to get one over on him.
He wanted to drain the swamp. He didn't realise quite how deep it ran. So... oh God, I'm so sorry.
Jesus.
I really am losing my voice. I apologise. An August 2022 report by the DHS Office of Inspector General sketches the rapidly accelerating move towards policing disinformation. From the outset, the CISA boasted of a, quote, evolved mission to monitor social media discussions while routing disinformation concerns to private sector platforms. In 2018, the DHS Secretary Kirsten Nielsen created the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force to respond to election disinformation. The task force, which included members of the CISA as well as its Office of Intelligence and Analysis, generated threat intelligence about the election and notified social media platforms and law enforcement. So it's basically saying, we think there's going to be election interference, so you should take preemptive measures to censor what we believe is coming from foreign actors. That then broadened to the scope of domestic actors who are spreading misinformation about the election.
Very, very nice broad categories right there.
Definitely. At the same time, the DHS began notifying social media companies about voting-related disinformation appearing on social media platforms. In 2019, the DHS created a separate entity called the Foreign Influence and Interference Branch to generate more detailed intelligence about disinformation, the Inspector General report shows. That year, its staff grew to include 15 full and part-time staff dedicated to disinformation analysis. In 2020, the disinformation focus expanded to include COVID-19, according to a Homeland Threat Assessment issued by Acting Secretary Chad Wolf.
God, I wish I had a name like that.
Yeah, I wish there were better politics involved in this gentleman, though. This apparatus had a dry run during the 2020 election when CISA began working with other members of the US Intelligence Committee. Office of Intelligence and Analysis personnel attended weekly teleconferences to coordinate intelligence community activities to counter election-related disinformation. So they had weekly meetings with all the alphabet agencies and social media to say who to censor and what. According to the IG report, meetings have continued to take place every 2 weeks since the elections. Emails between DHS officials, Twitter, and the Centre for Internet Security outlined the process for such takedown requests during the period leading up to November 2020. Meeting notes show that the tech platforms would be called upon to, quote, process reports and provide timely responses to include the removal of reported misinformation from the platform where possible. In practice, this often meant state election officials sent examples of potential forms of disinformation to CISA, which would then forward them on to social media companies for a response. Basically, the government chooses exactly what social media companies should be censoring, including the Hunter Biden laptop, which we'll get onto. Under President Joe Biden, the shifting focus on disinformation continued. In 2021, January, CISA replaced the Countering Foreign Intelligence Task Force with the Misinformation, Disinformation and Malinformation Team, which was created to, quote, promote more flexibility to focus on general MDM. So that means whatever the government doesn't like, they are allowed to censor and recommend social media platforms should censor. By now, the scope of the effort has expanded beyond disinformation produced by foreign governments to include domestic versions. The MDM team, according to one CISA official quoted in the IG report, quote, counters all types of disinformation to be responsive to current events. Jen Easterly, Biden's appointed director of CISA, swiftly made it clear that she would continue to shift resources in the agency to combat the spread of dangerous forms of information on social media. Quote, one could argue we're in the business of critical infrastructure, and the most critical infrastructure is our cognitive infrastructure. So building that resilience to misinformation, disinformation, I think is incredibly important, said Easterly speaking at conference in November 2021.
Well,
so
that
the
just
government
says it all, doesn't it?
will build your mental resilience. Yeah, exactly. You are cognitive infrastructure for the state. That is evil.
Yep, we need to brainwash or they won't do what's best for them.
Exactly. The CISA's domain has gradually expanded to encompass more subjects it believes amount to critical infrastructure. Last year, The Intercept reported on the existence of a series of DHS field intelligence reports warning of attacks on cell towers, which it has tied to conspiracy theorists who believe 5G towers spread COVID-19, which they don't, obviously YouTube. One intelligence report pointed out that these conspiracy theories are, quote, inciting attacks against the communications infrastructure. So they're using this as an excuse to say, hey, conspiracy theories can hobble our ability to communicate. Therefore, we have to censor communications so that conspiracy theories don't get in the way of
whatever message
the global
we're trying
conversation.
to push.
Yeah, but it's obviously coached in the idea of, this is critical infrastructure. Conspiracy theories might lead people to attack it. Therefore, we have to censor speech to keep everyone safe. You can see the way they've marketed it here quite deftly. Meeting records of the CISA, Cybersecurity Advisory Committee, the main subcommittee that handles disinformation policy at the CISA, show a consistent effort to expand the scope of the agency's tools to foil disinformation. So, it then starts talking about Nina Jankowicz and the government's disinformation board in this article. It makes mention of the disinformation board, and says, as we said earlier, it was the explicit front-facing arm of this, but it was already being done. The DHS eventually scrapped the disinformation board in August, while free speech advocates cheered the dissolution of the board. Other government efforts to root out disinformation have not only continued but expanded to encompass additional DHS sub-agencies like Customs and Border Protection, which, quote, determines whether information about the components spread through social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter is accurate. So, they're even controlling border crossing narratives. Other agencies such as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Science and Technology Directorate, whose responsibilities include determining whether social media accounts were bots or humans and how the mayhem caused by bots affect behaviour, and the Secret Service have expanded their purview to include disinformation, according to the Inspector General report. The draft copy of DHS's 2022 Quadrennial Homeland Security Review reviewed by The Intercept also confirms that DHS views the issue of tackling disinformation and misinformation as a growing portion of its core duties. While, quote, counterterrorism remains the first and most important mission of the department, it notes the agency's work on these missions is evolving and dynamic and must now adapt to terror threats exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online, including by domestic violent extremists.
It's great that in that little bit before there they talk about the amount of bots on social media and how they can cause mayhem, change narratives, change the way that people are viewing narratives, when now that Elon Musk has bought Twitter, he's like, okay, let's clear out all the bots then, and Twitter was refusing to tell them how many bots were on the website.
Do you remember when Elon initially pulled out of the deal?
Well, it was because of the fact they wouldn't reveal to him all of the bots.
Possibly. But Tim Pool had an opposing theory on this. It's partially that, because they know that the bots are swaying political opinions in a certain way.
Do you want to take another sip? Your voice is
I'll be all right, I'm sure.
All right.
But it's also that Elon, in the deal, must have been privy to non-disclosure agreement bound information, such as we have contracts with the federal government that we can't break, and if you sit in this chair, you must continue them. That's why he tried to escape it, because he realised the kind of spider's web he was getting himself into.
That would make sense.
Yeah, it's very worrying. So, reminder, when they talk about domestic extremists, they mean people that oppose the, quote, George Floyd protests. So it turns out that an FBI official interviewed by The Intercept described how in the summer of 2020 he was reassigned from his normal job of countering foreign intelligence services to monitoring American social media accounts. And on a June 2020 memo bearing the subject line, actions to address the threat posed by domestic terrorists and other domestic extremists prepared by the DHS headquarters for Wolf, Trump's acting DHS secretary, delineated plans to, quote, expand information sharing with the tech sector in order to, quote, identify disinformation campaigns used by domestic terrorist actors to incite violence against infrastructure, ethnic, racial, or religious groups or individuals. Bear in mind, inciting violence is not covered by the First Amendment. However, they go well beyond that in what they censor, because Biden then set up a Dobuin-style hate crime reporting website that I covered a little while ago with Dominic Frisby that said even comments, First Amendment protected things, will get you surveilled by this sort of stuff.
Well, that's the interesting thing, that this is completely terrifying, because barring the fact that they're not yet just locking people up for what's being said online, which I don't see as being completely outside of the realm of possibility, how is this any different from the level of surveillance, if not a massive improvement, if, in a sense, on the level of surveillance your average Soviet Union citizen was subject to?
Well, they didn't have the technological reach to actually achieve this.
They
the
didn't
ambition
have
was there.
the technology. This is what they would have done. The only thing separating our current regime from the regime back then is they've not yet started locking people up.
No, they haven't. Interestingly, though, their definition of domestic terrorist...
Well, actually, no. So let me correct.
Well,
they
for January
have
6th, yeah, they have.
They have started locking people up for January 6th, but you can say, oh, it's a riot, blah, 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 blah. But they have started potentially locking people up in places like Canada for questioning narratives based around gender identity, for instance.
They have. And if you'd like to know their definition of domestic terrorist, can we go over to the next one? Just a reminder, it's you. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said, for speaking at school board meetings and protesting gender ideology or BLM materials in school or trans identity ideology, Attorney General Merrick Garland acquiesced to a group that said we should put parents at school board meetings on a domestic terrorist watch list. So when they're talking about countering disinformation, misinformation, that means us, even though we aren't in the United States, and I'll go over how that happens later, and it means you, even the politically unplugged parents who aren't creating content, just showing up to school board meetings and going, what the hell are you putting in my kid's library? You are a domestic terrorist liable to be surveilled by the Department of Homeland Security. You should be very, very worried. So, back to the Intercept article, and I apologise at reading at length, but this is really heavy stuff.
It's very important stuff.
Yeah. Biden prioritised such efforts. Last year, the Biden administration released the first national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. The strategy identified a, quote, broader priority, enhancing faith in government and addressing the extreme polarisation fueled by a crisis of disinformation and misinformation often channeled through social media platforms, which can tear Americans apart and lead to some violence. Remember how he blamed it all on MAGA Republicans? Yeah. He means faith in the government is code word for faith in him, and reducing polarisation means neutering you and shutting you up if you criticise him. We are working with like-minded governments. Isn't that interesting? We are working with governments similar to us to censor misinformation. That's global American empire, for just those people that didn't realise that. Civil society and the technology sector to address terrorist and violent extremist content online, including through innovative research collaborations, the strategy document continued, adding that the administration was, quote, addressing the crisis of disinformation and misinformation, often channeled through social and other media platforms that can fuel extreme polarisation and lead some individuals to violence. Last year, a top FBI counterterrorism official came under fire when she falsely denied to Congress that the FBI monitors American social media and had therefore missed threats leading up to the January 6th Capitol occupation. I'm not using the framing they use in this. In the fact, the FBI had spent millions of dollars on social media tracking software like BabelX and Dataminer. According to the Bureau's official guidelines, authorized services include, quote, proactively surfing the internet to find publicly accessible websites and services through which recruitment by terrorist organizations and promotion of terrorist crimes openly taking place. So they're calling anyone who is going to go to the January 6th protest well in advance of people walking into the Capitol when they were let in by police officers as a terrorist organization.
I'm sorry, also knowing how the FBI operates, I've just got the Spider-Man image in my head of the two Spider-Man.
The Governor Whitmer plot, where most of the people involved with feds, or when, for example, the FBI director could not tell Ted Cruz whether or not there were FBI agent provocateurs encouraging people, including Ray Epps, to go into the Capitol.
Patriot Front that come across exactly like what you would expect a completely dissident and completely legit organisation to look like. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Another FBI official, a Joint Terrorism Task Force officer, described The Intercept being reassigned this year from the Bureau's International Domestic Terrorism Division, where they primarily worked on cases involving Al-Qaeda and ISIS, to the Domestic Terrorism Division to investigate Americans, including anti-government individuals such as racially motivated violent extremists, obviously not the Black Panther Party there, sovereign citizens, militia, and anarchists. So, Luke Radowski will be on their watch list any day now. They work on an undercover basis online to penetrate social networking chat rooms, online forums, and blogs to detect, enter, and dismantle and disrupt existing and emerging terrorist organizations via online forums, chat rooms, bulletin boards, blogs, websites, and social networking, said the FBI official. The Privacy Act of 1974, enacted following the Watergate scandal, restricts government data collection of Americans exercising their First Amendment rights, a safeguard that civil liberty groups have argued limits the ability of the DHS and FBI to engage in surveillance of American political speech expressed on social media. The statute, however, maintains exemptions for information collected for the purposes of a criminal law enforcement investigation. So all Americans are being treated as criminals. That's what's happening.
He is sovereign who decides the exception, as they say.
There are no specific legal constraints on the FBI's use of social media. Faiza Patel, senior director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program, told The Intercept. The Attorney General general guidelines permit agents to look at social media before there is any investigation at all. It's a wild west out there. The first FBI whom The Intercept interviewed in 2020 amid the George Floyd riots lamented the drift towards warrantless monitoring of Americans, saying, "Man, I don't even know what's legal anymore." So, that's the background, that's the history, that's the scope. Let's look at the actual effects. There's a quote in here that says, "The extent to which the DHS initiatives affect Americans' daily social media feeds is unclear. During the 2020 election, the government flagged numerous posts as suspicious, many of which were then taken down, got documents cited in the Missouri Attorney General's lawsuit disclosed. A 2021 report by Election Integrity Partnership at Stanford University, so not an election-denying outlet, found that nearly 4,800 flagged items, technology platforms took action on 35%, either removing, labeling, or soft blocking speech, meaning the users were only available to view content by bypassing a warning screen. The research was done in consultation with the CISA. So let's look at Twitter's role while in this article, shall we? Prior to the 2020 election, tech companies including Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, Wikipedia, Microsoft, LinkedIn, and Verizon Media met on a monthly basis with the FBI, CISA, and other government representatives. According to NBC News, the meetings were part of an initiative still ongoing between the private sector and government to discuss how firms would handle misinformation during the election. "We do not coordinate with other entities when making content moderation decisions, and we independently evaluate content in line with Twitter rules," a spokesperson for Twitter wrote in a statement responding to The Intercept. However, there is evidence of Twitter taking down small anonymous accounts according to the DHS's diktat. So during the 2020 election, the Department of Homeland Security sent an email to an official at Twitter. They forwarded information about potential threat to critical US infrastructure, citing FBI warnings in a case about an account that could imperil election system integrity. Can you guess about how large the scope of this account might be? What dangerous things they might have been saying?
Oh, well, I can see it on the screen there, so don't hold me in suspense.
The Twitter user in question had 56 followers, along with a bio that read, "DM us your weed store locations, hoes be mad, but this is a parody account." Under a banner image of Blucifer, the 32-foot-tall demonic horse sculpture featured at the entrance to the Denver International Airport. God knows why Denver has that.
Lucifer, never heard of that.
"We are not sure if there's any action that can be taken, but we wanted to flag them for consideration," wrote a state official in the email thread, forwarding on other examples of accounts that could be confused with government entities. So they thought this obvious parody account with 56 followers, they tried to say this could be confused with the government entity. Right. The Twitter representative responded, "We will escalate, thank you." Interesting.
It's a joke. It's all a joke.
Well, yeah, but do you remember the Alex Berenson lawsuit by any chance? So his lawsuit against Twitter was successful to reinstate his account, and during the discovery process,
Yeah, I do remember a bit of this now, actually.
Yeah,
carry on.
He exposed screenshots of an April 2021 exchange on Slack where Twitter employees had spoken to White House COVID advisor Andy Slavitt, and the Twitter employees said they had one really tough question about why Alex Berenson hasn't been kicked off the platform, because he is the epicenter of disinfo that radiated out towards the persuadable public. So that's very interesting.
Alex Berenson, epicenter of power.
Bringing down the Republic with his tweets. So Vijaya Gadde herself was also implicated in this. In June, the same DHS Advisory Committee of CISA, which includes Twitter Head of Legal Policy, Trust and Safety, Vijaya Gadde, formerly now also the woman that banned Cole, and University of Washington professor Kate Starbird, what a name, drafted a report to the CISA director calling for an expansive role for the agency in shaping the information ecosystem. The report called on the agency to closely monitor social media platforms of all sizes, mainstream media, cable news, hyperpartisan media, talk radio, and other online resources. They argued that the agency needed to take steps to halt the spread of false and misleading information, with a focus on information that undermines key democratic institutions such as the courts, or by other sectors such as the financial system and public health measures. To accomplish these goals, the report said CISA should invest in external research to evaluate the efficacy of interventions, specifically with research looking at how alleged disinformation can be countered and how quickly messages can be spread. Last Thursday, immediately following billionaire Elon Musk's complete acquisition of Twitter, Gadde was terminated from the company. And here we see the pieces coming together of Elon Musk going, what have I stumbled on here? And since Elon Musk has gone in, we now have this tweet from Unusual Whales, which is a investment and tech reporting outlet. Twitter has actually frozen internal employees out of the tools that they can use to censor disinformation and enforce policy. So what have they uncovered? They are worried that this is going to be continued, I think. So back to the Intercept. Let's look at Microsoft role, shall we? In late February, Jen Easterly, the CISA woman, texted with Matthew Masterson, that's very difficult to say, a representative at Microsoft who formerly worked at CISA, that she is trying to get us in a place where the federal government can work with platforms to better understand mis-dis trends so relevant agencies can try to pre-bunk/debunk as useful. So she's part of the intelligence agency's pre-crime division. So if we can go next one, the author of this has tweeted the screenshot out. This is actually a text exchange from Masterson and Easterly, and at the bottom, if we can just look at this, it says
I thought the tweet said that this was a between Vijaya.
No, this is a Microsoft. This is a Microsoft. Microsoft
executive. Oh yeah,
Microsoft
exec text. Okay,
yes.
Yeah.
At the bottom, if you can just go on the image, please, John. The text says, "Was on the call. The coordination is greatly appreciated. Was disappointed that platforms, including us, didn't offer more. We'll get there. And sector leadership had zero questions. We'll get there, and that kind of leadership really helps. Platforms have got to get more comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Again, Microsoft included. So
They're
Microsoft
so hesitant to just become evil tools of the evil government.
Do you remember when Google's tagline was "Don't do evil" and they got rid of it?
yeah, I understand why now.
Yep, not shocking. Now, remember as well, Microsoft have been censoring for a long time. This is a Forbes article here, where it says, the Microsoft Services Agreement governs the use of many of Microsoft's products, including most of its Office 365 products, Skype, and the Microsoft account that is used as the default login account for a new consumer Windows 10 installation. Much of the agreement concerns the routine, impenetrable legalese that defines all such terms of service agreements, yet since 2016, Microsoft agreement have included provisions banning the use of its Office 365 software to, quote, engage in activity that is harmful to you, the services, or others, including communicating hate speech, as well as banning, quote, illegal activity. Microsoft reserves the right to review your content, to investigate possible violations, and any content it considers to be a violation of these rules can result in Microsoft halting the user's access to its coveted products, including Office 365, and even the Microsoft account the user uses to log into their own desktops, laptops, and tablet devices. So this article actually scaremongers about, oh, what if they ban feminism and LGBT rights because it's illegal in other countries? Actually, Microsoft is going along with the progressive hegemon, and they are actively coordinating the alphabet agencies to censor you. Right, so let's go back to the Intercept article to talk about Facebook's role now. The Intercept talks about the censoring the Hunter Biden laptop. In an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast in August, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg revealed that Facebook had limited sharing of the New York Post reporting after a conversation with the FBI. The background here is the FBI came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, you should be on high alert. There was a lot of Russian propaganda in 2016. The FBI told them, Zuckerberg said, we have it on notice that basically there's going to be some kind of dump. When the Post story came out in October 2020, Facebook thought it fit that pattern, and the FBI had told them to look out for. But documents filed in the federal court as part of a lawsuit by the Attorney General of Missouri and Louisiana add a layer of new detail to Zuckerberg's anecdote, revealing that the officials leading the push to expand the government's reach into disinformation also played a quiet role in shaping decisions of social media giants around the New York Post story. According to records filed in the federal court, two previously unnamed FBI agents named Elvis Chan, an FBI special agent in the San Francisco field office, and Demlo, and the section chief of FBI's Foreign Intelligence Task Force were involved in high-level communications that allegedly led to Facebook's suppression of the post's reporting. So you can charge those gentlemen with treason.
What is it with all these absurd names popping up in this Elvis Chan? I'm sorry, America, you're just an absurd country.
Well, unfortunately, their remit is global. In May, the Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt took the lead in filing a lawsuit to combat what he views as sweeping efforts by the Biden administration to pressure social media companies to moderate certain forms of content appearing on their platform. Attorneys for the Biden administration have responded in court by claiming that the plaintiffs lack standing and that social media firms pursued content moderation policies on their own volition without any coercive influence on the government. On October 21st, the judge presiding over the case granted the attorneys general permission to depose Anthony Fauci, CIA officials, and communications specialists from the White House. The interesting thing here, the reason they included Fauci is the suit alleges government-wide efforts to censor stories, especially ones related to the pandemic. It also names multiple agencies across the government that participated in efforts to monitor speech and open collusion, that's a direct quote, between the administration and social media companies. It identifies, for example, emails between the officials from the National Institutes of Health, including Dr. Fauci, and Mark Zuckerberg himself at the beginning of the pandemic, and reveals ongoing discussions between senior Biden administrations with Meta executives on developing content moderation policies on a range of issues, including issues related to election and vaccine information. So, remember when they were partnering with The Atlantic to do COVID-19 articles? Turns out the government was feeding them that exact information on what to report. There's also a formalized process for government officials to directly flag content on Facebook or Instagram and request it be throttled and suppressed through a special Facebook portal that requires government or law enforcement emails to use. So, if we want to have a look at that, we can go next. There's a tweet that shows this from Li Fang, the author of the article, or I just found the archive link that's been shared around online. Still up. So you can just post the link in there if you have a government-issued email, and you can just directly take things down.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So
They're just a private company, bro.
Yeah, so it's not like they were acting of their own accord. The government were just going, here's the link, remove it. Great. There's also a thing leading up to this that I reported on a little while ago. Facebook had, without a subpoena, forwarded lots of messages that they'd identified as red-blooded American patriots over 19 months. The FBI headquarters in Washington, specifically the Domestic Terrorism Operational Unit, and this was done in the past. Facebook put out two statements of this. The first one said that Facebook and the FBI were trying to protect people from harm, and then an hour later they came out and said, oh, actually, no, that statement was wrong, it's false, we never did any of this. The spokesperson in question worked for Planned Parenthood and Obama for America, and now works on Facebook. So you can see where the deep state is sinking its teeth in here. So those are all the platforms. I'm not sure why we're surprised about any of this, though, because Jen Psaki came out and said this last year, and she had a mask-off moment and alluded to it. We've got a little clip.
This is a big issue of misinformation, specifically on the pandemic. In terms of actions, Alex, that we have taken, or we're working to take, I should say, from the federal government, we've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. We're working with doctors and medical professionals to connect to connected medical experts who are popular with their audiences with accurate information and boost trusted content. So we're helping get trusted content out there. We also created the COVID Community Corps to get factual information into the hands of local messengers. And we're also investing, as you all have seen, in the president's, the vice president's, and Dr. Fauci's time in meeting with influencers who also have large reaches to a lot of these target audiences who can spread and share accurate information. You saw an example of that yesterday. I believe that video will be out tomorrow. I think that was your question, Steve, yesterday. They did a full follow-up there.
So they're playing favorites which influence they like. They're handing the narratives to Facebook, and they're telling them exactly what to censor.
Saying it all with a big smile on the face as
yeah,
well.
Exactly. It's terrifying.
They're mocking us.
Also, do you remember this? Do you remember the Time magazine piece, by any chance?
Oh, everybody should remember this. This was, shocking that they came out and just admitted to all of this, that there was a shadow campaign going on behind the scenes.
They literally called it a cabal. We shouldn't be shocked that social media and pressure groups and the White House themselves have been conspiring to fortify the election and make sure that Donald Trump did not steal it.
And that's the thing,
they already said it.
These people could do a much better job of keeping all of this under wraps if they wanted to. The problem is that they're so vain.
Smug.
and so smug about it. They can't help but just rub it in everybody's faces.
Now,
Because at the end of the day, sadly, we're going over all of this. I don't see, without a complete upheaval of the elite ruling class of America, a complete pulling back of all of the influence that America has over all of the other countries across the globe that it has its tendrils in, I don't see how they don't just end up getting away with it.
well, this is the thing. If the Republicans sweep the midterms, if they sweep the presidency...
And then if they actually have the political will to do it...
Yeah, well, of course, you need to change Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy as the heads of the House.
we need Joseph
and
McCarthy
Senate.
back is what we
Yeah,
need.
exactly. You need to treat this article like a checklist of all the agencies and individuals who need gutting and indicting. Of course, in
Metaphorically
order.
speaking, of course.
Oh yeah. They need legal and political consequences. Yeah, they need to be indicted. They need their livelihoods stripped from them if they've done something treasonous, and they deserve jail time. Simple. Now, the most conspiratorial side of this, just before we wrap up, if we go back to this, is that JP Morgan Chase are heavily involved in all this. Yeah, very strange. In a March meeting, Laura Demlau, an FBI official, warned that the threat of subversive information on social media could undermine support for US government. Demlau, according to notes on the discussion attended by senior executives from Twitter and JP Morgan Chase, stressed that we need a media infrastructure that is held accountable.
Is this the same JP Morgan Chase that recently cut times with the one Mr. Kanye West?
Well, it's the same JP Morgan Chase that did this a couple of years ago. If we can go on to this, that not many people always talk about, but I love citing this document here. I've archived it. Blueprint for Digital Identity with the World Economic Forum. If we can just scroll down to page 12, John. Perfect, yeah. You can see every major financial institution, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Thomson Reuters, the UK Cabinet Office, the Australian Cabinet Office, and the White House. And this was 2015. So this has been in the works for at least 7 years with pretty much every institution. This is why they are always invited to the table. And what they want from you explicitly in this document is for you to have a consumer ID, a citizen's ID, a digital identity, a digital wallet, and the ability for you to vote to be tied for you to have all of this.
See, there's another problem with all of this as well, which is that if you as an individual wish to try and take action against something like this, if you wanted to organise some kind of boycott, what you've got there is a collection of businesses and industries and organisations that collectively own everything.
Yeah.
Everything you interact with on a day-to-day basis will, at some point down the line, have involvement with these organisations. So if you are spending money on literally anything, you will be funding these people indirectly at the very least. It has become almost impossible to actually dissent against these organisations.
The same thing with the hedge funds that BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard all own stakes in Twitter, for example. So all of the hedge funds that are partnered with the World Economic Forum also own these social media platforms.
I mean, BlackRock's not even partnered with the World Economic Forum. Larry Fink, the CEO, is on the board of the
Yes.
World Economic Forum.
Yes. If we can go up to pages 5 and 6, please. We can see here that the member of JP Morgan Chase was Max Nukreiken, group head of strategy, who contributed to this. We can go to his World Economic Forum just profile page. Yeah, that's great. Brilliant. So he's got a profile on the World Economic Forum, and it's not involuntary. He's a massive high up. Then we can go just back to the document. Yeah, so the people involved from the UK Cabinet Office was Chris Ferguson, and the woman involved from the White House's National Economic Council was Adrian Harris. So who's Chris Ferguson? We can just go to his, if we can scroll down. Leading the digital data and technology response to coronavirus. Right, so he was behind vaccine passports.
Brilliant.
So the digital ID man who wanted a digital citizen's wallet and central bank digital currency, which you could be deplatformed from if you said the wrong thing on social media, was in charge of COVID passports. If we can look at the member of the White House Economic Council, Adrian Harris is... she was nominated to lead the New York State Department of Financial Services by Governor Kathy Hochul in August 2021. Remember, the one that was appointed and is likely not going to be re-elected after...
After what's his face, Cuomo.
Yes, Mario Cuomo was excommunicated. And was confirmed by the New York State Senate on January 25th, 2022. She was a senior advisor to both Acting Deputy Secretary and Undersecretary for Domestic Finance, Mary Miller, and Deputy Secretary Sarah Bloom Raskin in the U.S. Treasury Department and Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy as part of the National Economic Council during the Obama administration. And she's also a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Research Fellow. It's a long-standing example of the coordinated secret conspiracies between international bodies, international banking institutions, international pressure groups funded by very wealthy billionaires with dark designs for us, and the deep state, the government. So, apparently, according to Natalie Winters, we'll just finish up with this very shortly, representatives from JP Morgan Chase, looking into the documents that fed into this Intercept article, were attending virtually all Department of Homeland Services meetings. Very interesting. So why do they have a stake in that? Well, I think we can go to this one that was recent, and the consultation period is coming up on it. This was March, reported on at the time, but turns out the White House have been developing a digital dollar, and Biden signed an executive order on it. So
CBDCs rearing their ugly heads again.
It literally says, based on the potential United States CBDC options, this report should include an analysis of potential implications, whether or not it can monitor and reduce carbon footprints, prevent fraud, ensure that taxes are paid. And so the Attorney General is involved. Remember the gentleman that designates you a domestic terrorist and has been coordinating all of these intelligence agencies to go after you via social media? He's involved in saying the legal implications of what a digital currency can do. So we have the international financial institutions, the international bodies, and social media all coordinating to basically sync up your social media to a digital ID and a digital citizen's wallet. If you say the wrong thing, surveillance of which has gone grander in scope, to the point that we will finish on in a second, that if you say the wrong thing, you will be utterly unpersoned. Digitally, you will not be able to vote and you will not be able to earn a living. And they have laid out this financial infrastructure.
Even if you do have money, they'll probably block your access to be able to spend it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for more of our coverage on the events leading up to this story, I just thought I'd finish with this. Josh recently did a little segment on how Joe Biden is spying on you, including over here. He recently did the National Security Memorandum on Partial Revocation of Presidential Policy Directive 28. This broadened the scope from America to be surveilled to literally anyone in any country, and removed your right to privacy considerations. And so it turns out that Josh was ahead of his time, because this is a very chicken and egg scenario, because this wasn't the start of it. This was just broadening the scope of the operation that was already going on.
This was please just the tip of the iceberg.
Please go and check this out. Basically, we've got a bunch of deep state barnacles on America right now, and they're pushing the tide higher and higher so that you can't reach beneath the bottom of the boat to scrape them off. This is all just a list of proven treachery. We have the names, we have the organizations. So Republicans, when you sweep the midterms, do something about it.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Heaters, you can go to lotusheaters.com to check out all the content we have on the site, such as this article from Bo, a red pill testimony. And if you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotusheaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.